If you've been without your favorite food for 3 months and it comes back, you go back to your favorite food. If you've been without it for a year, then you've changed your whole menu, and you might not go back. You probably will not go back 100%, and you have changed permanently. Now, we don't know yet where that's going to pan out, and that's where we will be watching very, very closely to see how habits have changed.
So, welcome everyone. This is MTech Podcast. My name is Nikolai Shetihin, and I have Jim Johnston with me. And today we have a guest. We have Gordon Butland. Hello, guys. How are you doing?
Fine,
Nick,
thank you.
Good. So, Gordon, great to welcome you today. I mean, Nick and I love to spend podcasts talking to people who have knowledge about the chicken or the poultry industry globally, and you're certainly in that category with a lot of experience internationally over a number of years. Traveling the world, looking at South American production and where you're based now in Asia. Currently working with G&S Agri Consulting, which is your own business. We're really looking forward to talking to you today.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's great to have you, Gordon. So, and my first question is about a little bit about your history, how you started with the poultry, with agriculture, and how you end up working in Asia.
Right. Well, it's quite an interesting story. I got into the poultry business a little bit late in life, at 50 years old, and I'd been in banking for about 3 years in Brazil, and then we had our debt crisis in Brazil. So the companies could pay the banks, but the banks couldn't get the money back to their homeland. So Brazil set up a system of debt conversion. And as I had been helping two other banks, one the Bank of Scotland and the Commercial Bank of Saudi Arabia, and they were good friends because they had done a lot of work in Chile on the similar thing with Rabobank. So I started to be with Rabobank, and we did debt conversion, and we invested in, at the time, the third or fourth largest poultry company in Brazil, where that time was called Frango Sul, and it's been passed along a few times since then. But the interesting thing on those days, we had 2% a day inflation. Now, you can imagine what raising chicken and doing even broiler accounting, imagine breeder accounting, with 2% a day inflation. But this had a very good effect. The only thing that was worth looking at were the performance, was the daily performance, the chicks and the feed and the yields, etc. So that had a very positive effect. I started to come to Asia in 1993. This was a time when very few people knew who Rabobank was. I did a project here in Thailand. And then in 95, the World Bank came and did a major project here in Thailand. And then we had the financial crisis starting in Indonesia, which actually didn't start with finance. It started with El Nino, which pushed up the price of cooking oil, and then nobody had money for anything else. So I was very involved in the financial crisis because Rabobank was contracted to make up the long-term plans for people to renegotiate debts in Indonesia, which were substantial. And then the financial crisis then in Thailand and China. So it was very good because that gave me a very good start in about 4 or 5 countries and really built up a network, which I still have today. And then 25 years later, I'm still here and still going strong.
Excellent.
Except I've added on a few countries, like doing a lot in Bangladesh at the moment, did a lot in China over the last 2 or 3 years, and still maintain a very active relationship in Brazil, where I help a cooperative. So it helps me to keep very close to what is happening and not just reading about it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I guess that kind of knowledge of how the poultry industry works in different countries is probably what we'd like to understand a wee bit more from you, Gordon. I mean, what would you see are the main differences between the Asian industry and the way the companies work and are structured in Asia compared to the rest of the world?
Well, I think in Asia, we've got to separate Thailand from the others. Why? Because Thailand, the core business is export. So, and especially after the bird flu in 2004, we have learned we have to do what the Europeans tell us to do. And then, of course, all the other countries around Asia are basically just domestic market. Only lately, if you start building up very big companies, nearly all of them started with small family companies. One company here that I started with in '95 was 40,000 birds a day. Now it is 600,000 or 700,000 birds a day, and very, very interesting. And everybody has the same mentality all over the world. You make a profit and you put more birds on the ground. That is a universal law of chicken, and then you make a loss. But the differences, I think for example, the veterinarians here in Thailand, the vets are very close community, and they are very visual. Say, I would say, in Brazil, I really don't come into contact much with people from the field. And the other difference is that whereas in Brazil, US, most of Europe, you are all contract farmers. Here, a lot of difficulty to get the contract farmers. When I first came here, chickens were raised over fish ponds. And now you have these major complexes which have been built up because supposedly you are then able to export if you have bird flu that is not being tested. So you've got complexes of the top 3 or 4 companies with 3 million birds. So you don't have that in Brazil. And because of AI, I consider today that the broiler grow out, especially in these company farms, is better than a PS, biosecurity, etc., in other parts of the world. It is we've learned the hard way, and it is really, really good, the biosecurity. Very, very good.
All right. And if we talk about the growing and if we talk about agriculture and poultry and think about technology, Western world was always with the technology or earlier with the technology, and it was always available here with software, with tech companies, with all things like that. But now we see that Asia is really setting trends in terms of technology and in terms of high tech. And like you said, Thailand is a little bit different because there's a lot of production there as well. There's like a lot of computer production, hardware, and all that. And how do you see poultry keeping up on technology? Is it picking up faster than it used to, or it's still on the same pace?
It's slow. And I think we have to go back. When we say the Western world, I do also separate the Western world into the USA and the others. And surprisingly enough, in my view, Brazil is closer to Thailand than it is to the US. US, why? They're born with agri-stats in the dummy. They're agri-stats. They are weaned on agri-stats. So they have a data culture based on agri-stats. And then, so your tech companies in the US, you built up 10, 20, 30, 40-year relationships with the Tysons and the Pilgrims, etc. So as the new technology comes, it's easier because you already have the relationship with those big companies and the credibility. You say, okay, we've got a new thing here. Let's try it in just over here. And that will go. Well, you can't do that, obviously, in Asia. And then in Asia, what we see is that you've got some big companies like the CP Group, and they do a lot of this themselves, and they are very forward-looking. They are very innovative. They've tried robots and all these sort of, but don't forget that a lot of the Asian companies, we are not big, you know, so we are, it depends what you call big, but we are, our biggest companies outside of the CPs are 400,000 or 500,000 birds a day, which is quite small when you're comparing with those big guys. And then the trouble that I find then is you have to find a champion. And this champion has to be really keen, has to know enough about this technological side to see that it's really worthwhile for the company, and that champion, he has the control of a certain budget that he can spend X amount to develop the thing. And also what you don't have here is so much, shall we say, mingling of management. Like in the USA, you have the National Chicken Council where everybody sees each other 3 or 4 times a year. In Europe, you have AVEC. We've just tried this. You know, you should think about it. Well, you don't have that sort of thing here. But what does get around are the disasters. So, you know, as you know, over the years, you've had quite a few disasters around the world with SAPs and ERPs, etc. And people have tended to equate what you and I and Jim do with SAP and ERP. Yes, if they have it, we use it, and thank you very much. But so when you go and knock on the door of somebody who last year had a terrible experience with SAP, you say, oh, here we go again. So it's been very difficult. So you are missing that champion. So when you go into a company, and I'd say these smaller companies, is how do you build then a relationship, and how do you prove to somebody that this quite expensive tools really will give a return on investment, and then do a good job so that other people will hear about it. And as I said before, the vets are a close community, and a disaster will get around on the golf course next week, where the good things will take a little bit more time. But it is slow, and there's not enough education, although I don't think this is just Thailand. For example, in the veterinary community, now and again, my wife does training, and I'm asked to go along and say a few words to the vets, etc. And the other day, I asked the 40 vets of about 25 years old, please, somebody tell me about big data. Absolute silence. They really didn't know what big data was. So you know, you have to get those people interested in pushing their bosses. Look, we need this, we need that, and I'd like to just give the example of Brazil, where I spent a lot of time with this subject. We tried to get a tech company in about 5 years ago. We couldn't. Management thought it was a bit expensive, even though it's a forward-looking management. So we managed. By good luck, we found a couple of really good people, and we put in Power BI. Oh, so what they have today is a data culture from top to bottom. And I think if you ask me, what does a company need to start off a process, it needs to have a data culture. And once you have a data culture, what we're getting today in that company in Brazil, we're getting top management coming to us, i.e. the guys down in the boiler room, and saying, how can we improve that? How can we improve that? Well, yes, if we have that investment, and we're starting on something now, which hopefully will then lead to really a complete integration, which is my dream, is have the integration from the parent stock all the way to the product going out of the door at the end of the day. So it's up. And Jim said about people, you must have the people to build on. And that's another little bit of a problem in Asia. We have a language issue. Certainly in Thailand, it's not so easy. In other countries, I think a little bit easier. But then we will have to develop people in Asia to actually do the work on the ground. Now, the good thing, most Asian companies today, the data is there. Maybe they don't even know it's there. But every company I go, I can get the breeding data by flock, by week, by whatever you like, by day even, for the last donkey's years, and broilers also for the last 10 years. The top manager might not even know it's there, but it is there. So you've got the basic tools to work with, and I think what will come is the more sophisticated things, i.e., the sensors in the chicken house, and these are. But also, again, it's a problem. It's a problem that a lot of people, we get that data, and even good technical guys, they don't know what it means. So they come up with, say, the humidity is this. I said, well, what should the humidity be? Oh, well. And then you've got to sort of, we have on our side a lot of education to do also.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, absolutely right, Gordon. And I know from my own kind of workings and travels and working with poultry companies in Asia and Thailand more specifically, the culture is very different in that part of the world. Now, how does that impact on the way they operate, the way they run their business, how they manage their businesses? I mean, and have you seen that culture change? Is there any changes in the way the younger generations are approaching it?
I think it's changed a lot in a big company, and you can say this because it's public knowledge that CP is completely changed its generation, really because the top management got to the 65s and 70s, and then very interesting people that I knew when they were very young, 15, 20 years ago, but then they sort of disappeared to India or Myanmar, and suddenly they come back into very senior positions, and that younger generation still having the respect for their elders, and less there's a little bit of a culture here. Well, if I don't innovate something, I can't be blamed for it. That is now changing significantly, and I see this from my wife is very much in this business and training, and the people really want to learn. Even the contract farmers, we will go out on Sunday and give training for 30, 40 contract farmers on how to catch birds and things like that. So there is a drive for knowledge. As I said before, we learned the hard way with Europe. We will basically do what Europe tells us to do. And they realize that also that their long-term future and their short-term future depends that we do it correctly, and we are subject to, as you know yourself, if you get audited by a Tesco or a McDonald's, you know that you've been audited, and also if you come out of those with a 95%, let's say, clean sheet, you've done a good job. So I think that this culture is changing. The younger generation they are really good. We are as good technically as certainly as Brazil, and now and again, without upsetting anybody in the USA, we are as good as the USA a minute, but we don't have the depth of people. So we don't have the Iowa State, we don't have the Georgia Tech, and etc. So we don't have that. And also, Jim and Nicola, we don't have the data that's available in the US, where you have all the egg sets every week. You have the prices of breast, et cetera, every week. You know what's happening in food service every week. And when you don't have that, it is very, very difficult to work. And then it's a little bit, I think, you think, it's et cetera. It's difficult. There aren't very many sources of reliable data. Quite a bit is hearsay. So you've got to build up your own and do your own calculations of how many parent stock are out there, how many chicks are. And this is very important now when we get on in the future. I'm sure we will be talking about COVID, et cetera, in a minute, of what's happening with COVID, et cetera.
Yeah, and like you said, it's a lot of data, a lot of knowledge in the poultry, and people keep on learning. And it doesn't matter which market you're at, whether you in US or in Asia, it's always there is something new to learn, some new technology or some new experience or some new practice. And like you mentioned about COVID, I wanted to ask about it. So we saw different kinds of effects on the COVID, on pandemic, on the markets, and different companies have different troubles because of it. So what you see in Asia, in Thailand, and how companies are dealing with this? Maybe there's a positive or negative effect you see.
Well, in Thailand, we've been competent and lucky. We've had very few fatalities. In fact, we haven't had a fatality now for about 3 months, and we're not getting community spreading. The people who are infected are coming back from all parts of the world and then going into quarantine, and then they are tested, and then there's quite a few of these people are infected. Now, there's been no plant which is closed. One hatchery was closed for 15 days. Yes, they have slowed down the lines, and we reduced production, but that was mainly because about 40% of Thai exports go to Europe, and of that, a lot go to the UK, into the food service business, and the food service business in the UK was decimated. So, and this creates a new, well, it's not a new problem, but it's been, now it's out there because of the big effect of COVID. And that's the following. So if you look at the Thai exports in general, they are the same as last year. You think, oh, no problem. But when you go down a little bit, and then you see that we used to be 65% cooked product, 35% raw. We are now 57% cooked and 43% raw. And the cooked is gone down because of EU, especially the UK. And the raw's gone up because of China. And Japan early in the year, because of the Olympics that were going to be, they stocked up and then it's back to normal. But so you swapped about 30,000 tons of breast meat for 20 to 30,000 tons of mid-wing, feet, and bone-in leg. And that's a bit of a problem for a chicken. So we reduce production because if you lose, as we lost between March and June, 9,000 tons of breast meat, that is 18 million chickens. And 18 million chickens is about 15% of the Thai normal production. So we reduced the production. And then guess what? We ran out of wings and legs to send to China. Now we're going to go back to normal. But this is a permanent structural issue for which COVID is brought out. And as I should have said at the beginning, we've got COVID on one side and we've got African swine fever on the other side. Okay, so you've got two. One is a big benefit for most of us, except for China, and COVID's been that negative. Now, in the countries here, outside of the US and Europe, everybody else's safety net has been much lower than your guys. You know, where in the US, some people got more money staying home than going to work. But if you take Brazil, which is about $120 a month, and that's between $100 and $150 a month around most of Asia. But that's going to run out soon. And when you look at all the unemployment, and Thailand is so heavily dependent, about 15 million of 60 million people are involved in tourism. And that just came to a halt. And they're being paid, but you don't see this tourism coming back in the next 6 months to 1 year. And the government can't keep handing out money forever. And I feel that we have not yet seen the bottom of domestic consumption, not just here in Thailand, in Asia, but in many other places also. In fact, when you look at sales over the last 6 months, they are surprisingly high, okay? But when you start to read the latest results from the US of the, some of them are in Q3, and their guidance for Q4, etc., is look, that we think we're going to get into trouble, and you know, you really haven't had a big drop in production hardly anywhere, but you start to see in the US a drop in production, and I think although here in Thailand you've seen a recovery, again, I think in a couple of months' time people are going to have so much breast meat in their stock they're going to reduce again. Now in the rest of Asia it's very difficult. It's really ringing up your friend, what's happening, you know, there's no data. Now in the Philippines, it's really going reasonably well because of the shortage of pork. Vietnam, similar shortage of pork. And, but I think we're going to be affected in terms of the local demand out through the middle of 2021. And then it's not sure how people will change their habit. You can actually live in Thailand for less than $1 a day. Yes, you're going to get fed up with noodles quite quickly, but you can eat for less than 30 baht, less than $1 a day, and you will survive. Now, so people have changed their habits of, and poultry is obviously the main winner, but then it's the cheaper cuts. And it's a question, as we saw in 2009 with the financial crisis around the world, if you've been without your favorite food for 3 months and it comes back, you go back to your favorite food. If you've been without it for a year, then you've changed your whole menu and you might not go back. You probably will not go back 100%, and you have changed permanently. Now, we don't know yet where that's going to pan out. And that's where we will be watching very, very closely to see how habits have changed.
Yeah, I mean, that whole COVID thing is probably a podcast in its own right, isn't it? And what's been really interesting is the dynamic impact it's had in poultry businesses around the world, the change of their product mix, which has been quite dramatic.
Yep.
You know, food service going down and retail going up, but the whole product mix, you're selling the same number of chickens, but very different SKUs. And the challenge of how you manage that within these businesses from a planning point of view, and then scenario planning and the speed at which you can scenario plan just to try and second guess and work on what some of these trends might be is it's becoming an increasingly important area to have capacity in within any poultry organization, I suggest. But you know, Gordon, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. And really
could I add just one thing there,
yeah,
Jim?
For
I
sure.
think this is a huge opportunity for us on the tech side of the table. Is and you know yourself, because I brought something, but there is one company in Brazil who's come to our side of the table and said, you know, I need this, and I'm sure around the world this increasing complexity, and that's all of a sudden. Oh, next week it's changed. Well, you don't have time to go and do spreadsheets for a week of what your scenarios. You need something that within 1 hour you can come back with 2 or 3 scenarios that management. Now, it's up to us then to convince people that there's something there that can be put in very quickly and help to resolve this issue.
Absolutely, it's a key area. And yeah, look, it's a pleasure talking to you about this, and hopefully we can organise a future podcast, go into some of these areas in much more detail with you. It's been fun sharing your history, and how you came to the industry is a little bit unique, I guess, from banking and then into poultry, and then you know you've really got into poultry in a big way over the last few years, and it's great to catch up with you around the world as we do.
I'm a management accountant by training.
By trade.
And all I've done is apply management account, and it's very interesting in Bangladesh. And all the accountants in Bangladesh and Malaysia, because they were English colonies, they all have FCCAs and FCWAs, etc. So when I talk about this or that, they know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Now in other countries, for example, here like Thailand, there's no formal budget and costing training. So places which you think would be more backward, it's much easier to actually, and at the end of the day, gentlemen, we have to have a return on investment in all this technology. Yeah, and then when you've got good accountants on the other side of the table, sometimes it might be difficult to prove what you're saying, but at least they know what you're talking about.
No, that's very true. That's the one thing that we're all focused on, isn't it? And have to be continually talking about is the return on investment. So, hey, thanks again, Gordon. It's been good. We've touched on technology, your career, big data, the amount of data, and the fact that we all love analyzing data. It's the way forward. And the fact that there's a data culture out there, certainly within Thailand and Asia, is great. We can tap into that and hopefully utilize that going forward. So we appreciate your time, and thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Nikolai.
Yeah, thanks, Gordon, for joining us. And for those who are watching this episode and don't want to miss new episodes, please join us on social media. We are on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and on Instagram. And we'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks, Nick. See you later.
See you. Bye.
Thank you.